Christians, we are called not only to avoid abuse and protect people from abuse, but to refuse to conceal abuse when we know it's happening or has happened. Proverbs 10 verse 6 says, blessings are on the head of the righteous, but the mouth of the wicked conceals violence. These words of God make it a sin to encounter abuse and look the other way. It makes it a sin to blame the victim. It makes it a sin to help the abuser exit quietly or else feel more compassion for guilty predators than the innocents that they abused. Fourthly, we live in a sinful world where abuse is happening. There is a high likelihood that someone who has been abused is already a part of your congregation, no matter the size of your church. As leaders, we must be doggedly determined to care for these people who are struggling. Psalm 147 verse 3 says, he heals the brokenhearted and binds up their wounds. As DeKalb Baptist, I hope and trust that you will desire to be Christ-like. One of the ways that we can demonstrate our conviction is to establish safeguards and systems in our churches to assist abuse victims in finding community, a place to express their grief, to help them understand their shame and discover the hope and healing that is found in Jesus Christ. Perhaps we are never less like God than when we turn our backs on victims of abuse and expect them to work out their own problems. Michael Ware has said, a church that shows itself to care about the public is much more likely to lead to a public that cares about the church. Let me say that again. A church that shows itself to care about the public is much more likely to lead to a public that cares about the church. You've heard me speak, you've heard me say, at least in Etowah County, this is our neighborhood, and I would say the same to you, DeKalb County Baptist. This is your neighborhood, and this is your mission field. The area of sexual abuse prevention and protection and response to victims is such a crucial way that we can show how much we care about our community. So this afternoon, Brother David and Brother Keith have assembled this panel. One of the things that I learned in the process of being chair of a sexual abuse task force is that we cannot dictate response from headquarters. For Southern Baptist, our headquarters in Nashville, and I would dare say very few of you listen to what Nashville has to say. For Alabama Baptist, headquarters is Prattville. While you may have a better connection with the folks in Prattville, you still are missing the connection that I think is needed in order to encourage us to actually do something about this in our local churches. So the Lord gave me the impression and the thought that the way that if this is going to make a difference and if we're going to make headway against this problem is to make it local. When you hear about child abuse, sex abuse, and other forms of abuse, what's happening in your county today, I think you'll have a different perspective than if I just shared with you national or statewide statistics. When you hear about victims, the victimization of children in DeKalb County today, you're going to take a different viewpoint in wanting to take action because this is your community. So these folks that are on this panel are on the front line every day. They're every day fighting against this. Whatever position they hold, they are working to help victims. They're working to stop the criminals. They're working to stop the perpetrators and the predators that live here in your county. They're doing all they can to make your children, make your schools, and to help you make your churches as safe a place as they possibly can be. So today you have on this panel, you have Summer Summerford, DeKalb County DA, Denise Raines, Director of the DeKalb Department of Human Resources, Josh York, Investigator with the Fort Payne Police Department, Beth Nicely, Therapy Counselor for the Child Advocacy Center, Amber McPherson, Interim Director of the Child Advocacy Center, and Judge Shonathan Bell, Circuit Judge for Cherokee and DeKalb counties. And what I would like to do today is to just give them the opportunity to share with you what they see in your county and what they see is happening, and also to offer points of advice and give you direction as to how you can do something to protect the children in your church. And I'll have more to say about that at the end. But I'd like to start today with Investigator Josh York, working with the police department, receiving calls, being sent out to investigate these. Josh, would you share with us today the experiences you have and what you see is happening in DeKalb County, even right now in 2023? A little bit about what's going on.
Josh York, investigator. I supervise 5 other investigators.
Is your mic on? You mash that button.
Is that better? Josh York, law enforcement 23 years. I supervised 5 investigators at Fort Payne. And I have one individual investigator that does mostly the sex crimes in Fort Payne City. But unfortunately, we started getting a number of them that we have to spread out between all of us. We can get a case involving some kind of sexual crime once to twice a week. And unfortunately, it doesn't mean that every one of them gets prosecuted, because it turns into a he said, she said. And it's our job to try to find some physical evidence to bring to the DA's office to hopefully convict these guys if they did do what they did. And the unfortunate thing is there starting to be so many of them. In my personal opinion, I blame a lot of them on the internet. You know, YouTube's done great for us. I can fix some stuff I never have fixed before. But unfortunately, it gives a gateway for these like-minded offenders to talk to each other, kind of work up a plan, kind of see who worked for what, you know, what individual this worked for them, so forth, so forth. And the other side of it is every kid that's walking in school's got a phone. And all that phone is a small PC that used to be on a desktop. Well, in each phone, we got app after app after app. And unfortunately, these apps may be created in Canada, you know, somewhere, you know, not in the U.S., and some of them are actually being designed for, you know, sexual purposes of minors. And as a law enforcement, we get information on these apps, try to send off subpoenas, send off search warrants, and get information on the offenders so we can convict them here in DeKalb County. And, you know, whatever country they're in, they may not be friendly to the U.S., so we may just get bare minimum and sometimes nothing back. And it's turned into a real problem for us law enforcement trying to get convictions on these guys or women. And like I said, and then that's just one thing to say, but it's just turned into a real problem. Like I said, and as far as the church goes, and as far as what I see is sexual offenders is any kind of criminal. And what they're going to look for is a soft target, whether it's a school, a robbery, or whatever. In the church, you know, all of us Christians, we want to welcome everybody in and make our doors open and make them feel welcome. And that's, you know, our job as a church body. But at the same time, you have to kind of stay on the guard, because we are a soft target, especially for victims, for child victims, and or women or whoever. And I think that's the line is hard to toe right now as far as the church goes, is being welcoming and staying on your guard and learn what these offenders are going to, you know, their traits, their characteristics, on how they carry themselves, and hopefully, if you have any questions, you know, at the end of this, ask. We can try to enlighten you however we need to.
So, Josh, what you're saying is that the problem is on the rise, though. There's an increasing number of cases.
Yeah, in my experience, it is.
Okay.
Reports it is.
That's what we need to know, church. This is basically what Josh is saying, and I'm sure everybody else will say, is this is a problem that's not going away. It's not going to go away. It's a problem, though, that we've not given good attention to, because as investigator Josh said, we want to feel good about everybody and believe that everybody's good, and especially if they come to our churches. And you heard him use the term soft target. Soft target. They're looking at churches because that's the way they expect you to behave. They expect you to welcome them without question and comment. And so I think it's very important what Josh has just told you about the importance of awareness. And Josh may have more to say in just a moment, but I want to move to DHR at this point in time, and I want us to think about the role of DHR. And as we think about that today, what we want to focus on is the importance of screening and reporting. So I want to give Denise an opportunity to talk to you about what DHR's role is in all of this, and also talk about what your responsibility is when it comes to child abuse.
Well, like he said, I'm Denise Raines, and I'm the director at DeKalb County DHR. I have been there over 25 years, so I'll kind of be speaking across the length of time, thinking back about some of that. I want to thank Brother David for the opportunity for us to be here and present this topic to y'all. The role of DHR in this county is to make children safe. That is my ultimate responsibility. How that starts is really with this whole group of people. Most all reports come into DHR. Not to say they don't take reports, but most of them initiate with us, and then we start getting the others involved, whether that be neglect, physical abuse, sexual abuse, or emotional abuse. I know they titled this today about prevention. Most everybody here works in the realm of after that fact. We get on board to figure out what's went on and then what we're going to do about it after we figure out what has happened. I do want to say in the role of prevention, though, he talked about reporting. I think a lot of times if we as the public, he said, will report sooner, it will make some prevention of some things. And I say that in respect, one of the best examples I can think of is drug use. That probably encompasses about over 95% of all of our cases at DHR involve drug use. Now, if we find out about that as the public and make a report before that parent gets to using to the point where they're no longer supervising their children and strangers in and out of the home, that kind of thing, I do think that'll have some impact on prevention of sexual abuse. Sexual abuse occurs most of the time when your child is alone with someone. And my child's not going to be alone with someone. And so that's what we've got to think about. How are we going to prevent that? I know here, this is also my home church. Here at our church, we have a plan in place about how many people, how many adults are with children, that kind of thing, whether it be in the church vans, classrooms. Not that many, very small percent of reports come from the churches. I'm not sure why that is. I think they briefly, and it may have been when we were in the other room, talked about, churches investigating reports themselves. Never do that. There should be some kind of protocol in your church so that is reported to law enforcement or the Department of Human Resources. I do want to say, and you're welcome, I can give this information to Brother David to send out, or you can get with me at any time. There is a mandatory reporting training. Not that everybody in here is a mandatory reporter, but that training will help you understand what to report. That's on our DHR website. It's open for everybody, and it does give you a certificate, and I'll be happy to kind of send out that information. want to talk about reporting. It is anonymous. You can, even if you tell us who you are when you call, that report is anonymous to the parents or whoever you're reporting. So I wanted to talk about that. A lot of times people get caught up in not knowing what to report. Is this reportable? That kind of thing. The difference between, is it just poverty or is it actually neglect? Is it abuse and neglect or is it bad parenting? The good thing is you don't really have to figure that out. Because if you call us, that's what we do. And even though what you may provide to us may not be a report, it may be something that we add to other information that has came into us about that family. I just want to say, if you're in doubt, always report that. You can call us anytime. Kelly Bearden, I don't know if you know her, a lot of people do. She's actually my intake worker. She takes all our reports. You can come by, call, mail it in, email. You're welcome to call me even, but we take all those reports coming into the county. I also want to say there is a form that's on the DHR website. If you have trouble finding it, you can get with Brother David. I'll be happy to send that out as well. And it's a report where you can have those in your church checked through the central registry. What that means is you can see if they have a report that is true of child abuse or neglect. That has nothing to do necessarily with law enforcement or they're convicted of a crime. They could have a report of child abuse where they have done something previously to child, physical, neglect, sexual, or emotional. And before my time ends, I want to say one of our biggest needs in our counties is foster homes. If every church in this county had one foster home in their church, we would meet our county's needs 2- and 3-fold for our children that we are protecting. So I'd like for you to really pass that along to your church and think about that. So I appreciate it.
Thank you, Denise. Can you just say one more word about why it's important that a church does not do a self-investigation? Can you just hit on that just a little bit more?
Yes, very good point. What we've seen when that happens is that child is not necessarily protected for the future, but that person also, even in the same church they're in, or moved to other churches, and the same thing happens. It happens at lock-ins. It just all kinds of situations. It's come about, like I said, we don't have that many reports out of the church of sexual abuse, but a lot of that comes in the youth ministers being able to have the youth's phone numbers, and they start relationships through being able to contact the youth. So, and when the church handles that and they just move to the next church, you're right back in the same situation, and children are not protected.
Thank you, Denise. The bottom line is that we're not qualified for this. Been to seminary. A lot of you may have been to seminary. I didn't get a class on how to respond to child abuse or an accusation of child abuse. Because of our tendency to look for the good in everyone and all of mankind, we tend to lean toward the goodness rather than perhaps what is reality. And that is that, that there are people out there that are targeting and are looking and are, for lack of a better term, a predator. They're looking for that child that they can victimize and looking for a way to do it. And so I think what Denise is saying here, this is why, first of all, you don't need to be afraid to make the call. Denise and her team are not going to broadcast that Craig Carlisle called and reported Brother Joe for child abuse. It doesn't work that way. It is completely anonymous. So you don't need to be afraid to make the call, but you also don't need to be afraid to make the call, because the goal is the truth, is to find out what the truth is. And this is what Denise and her team do. This is what and Detective Josh and his team do. This is their job. This is what they are trained for, is they know how to ask the questions. They know what to look for in these victims. So that's why we don't need to do it, because one of the problems, many of you may know, you're Southern Baptists, that we as Southern Baptists have gotten egg on our face the last couple of years because of the way we handled abuse cases. And the primary reason, whatever you believe, the primary reason we got in trouble and have been criticized is because we believed the accused rather than the victim. We did not advocate for the victim. We did not give the victim the benefit of the doubt. We gave whoever perpetrated the victim the doubt. And as a result, we covered up known abuse. We neglected investigations that should have been had. We messed up big time. It's why this is an issue today. It's why we're trying to correct it today. And so I hope that you'll listen to what Denise is saying to you, is that, if there's a question, make the call. It's not a question for a staff meeting. It's not a question for a deacon's meeting whether or not you make the call. If you hear of something and you don't know if it's reportable or not, that really doesn't matter. If there's a question, you make the call. And you can call Denise and her team, and they will answer questions for you too. If it is questionable, they will help you determine. But the important thing is that we can't neglect the victim. If it is a child, and the fact of the matter is, some people say, well, what if they lie? What if they make it up? It is a known fact, and I'm sure some of this panel can back this up, that children do not lie about abuse. If they tell you somebody has touched them inappropriately, you can pretty well count on the fact that they have been touched inappropriately. Or if somebody did something to them that is wrong and they questioned it, you can pretty well bet that and count on the fact that that child has been a victim. And so we have to be so careful today. It's such an important thing to be sure that the victim knows that we care about them. And an organization that can help do that is the Child Advocacy Center. We are blessed to have Amber and Beth from the Child Advocacy Center. And I want them to talk about it. You may have heard of them, but you may not know what their purpose is. And I want them to just share with you about their role when it comes to abuse of children here in this area. So, Amber, if you want to start, that'll be fine, and then let Beth speak.
Will do. Am I on? Okay. Like you said, my name is Amber McPherson. I'm the acting director at the Children's Advocacy Center, but for the past 5 years, I have been the forensic interviewer at the Children's Advocacy Center. If you know the concept of an advocacy center, it's to provide a warm, home-like atmosphere for children that have been suspected to have been physically, sexually, or have witnessed violent crimes. So that's our main purpose. If we did nothing else at the Advocacy Center, we would provide that for them. Children that Denise gets reports on, or that the law enforcement gets reports on, they'll make an appointment for the child to be seen at the Advocacy Center, and then both of these departments will come and watch the interview through a closed circuit television, where they do not have to talk to the child, but the child is only talked to with one person, which is an amazing thing, because the child is not re-victimized over and over and over by having to tell their story over and over and over. But they're talking with one person who's trained how to talk to them, no matter what the age. I've talked to a child that was 2 that had pretty good vocal, was able to talk to me. And then I've talked to a child that was 2 that mama could understand, but I could not. And then I've talked to 18 and 19, and I have talked to some adults that have been mentally impaired, and I've spoke to them as well. For the most part, though, when they have good verbal skills, I'm able to talk with them and help them to tell their story. At the Advocacy Center, when it first opened in the early 90s, we not only wanted to be we didn't want to just intervene, which is exactly what we do. We intervene once an abuse allegation is made, but we also wanted to be proactive. So the very first program the Advocacy Center started was a prevention program that went into the schools, and that's what we still do today. We go into the schools in every single county and city school, and we talk about prevention. We talk about child abuse, and we talk to our children about what to do and how to recognize it, and if it is happening, to do. And I'm very, very proud of that because, again, there is intervening people, but there's not as many some that is proactive. And I think that's where the churches come in too, is to try to help to prevent child abuse, to give that to support to families, but also to intervene when need be, to be able to do that. Now we can talk all day long in our schools to the children, but really I think the most important thing is for it to be done in the home. I think that's where it makes the most. The difference is to be able to talk to your children at home, because even you're protecting your children, but you also may be protecting the child sitting next to them that might tell them what's going on at home, and then they know they need to tell. So it's real important if our children are healthy and strong and have that model at home, that they can help children also. So I think that's real important. I think being a forensic interview and talking to children, I think there's 2 main reasons that children don't disclose abuse. I say there's lots of reasons, but the 2 of the main reasons that they have told me personally, and that I keep hearing this over and over again, is that they're threatened by the abuser and they're scared. They don't want to tell. So that was one of the reasons that I hear. And like I said, in my 5-year tenure as being a forensic interviewer, I've talked to over 600 children in our community. And that's one theme that I see that recurring. Another thing is they don't want to tell because they think they're going to be in trouble with their parent, the caregiver, their grandparents, whoever's taking care of them. They're afraid that they're going to be in trouble with them, and so they don't want to tell. Open line of communication with your kids is crucial at every single age. I just think that's so crucial. When they're young, talking to them about their bodies, letting them know how special they are, and that there are special parts on their body that no one should be looking at, nobody should be touching, nobody should take pictures of. And no one else should be doing that to them, showing them their parts on their body, showing pictures to them of people in their body. And those type of things, that may make you really uncomfortable when I said that, but it's a conversation that has to be had with your children, to let them know, to giving them what they need to keep themselves safe. Don't make it shameful. Don't make their body shameful to them. I would say you could agree on names for their body parts that's comfortable for them and comfortable for you. I've heard some parents made it into a game and just would say things like, they pick out secret code names that they would use in case the kid had an issue or a problem they could talk to their parents about. Just be open and honest. That's, I guess, one of the biggest things that I would come away with after I talk with children. I just wish parents would have had that open line with their children. Give them tangible things that they can do. That's another thing. Give them tangible things, like to tell the person, no, I don't like that. It's uncomfortable. It's okay to say no to an adult or to your brother or to your cousin or to your coach. It's okay to get away from that person if they can. And the most important thing is to tell somebody about it. Now, I say that's the most important thing because, kind of like what the investigator said, if there is an adult who wants to abuse a child, they're going to abuse a child. I hate to say that. They're usually stronger, they're smarter, and they have a plan. And And that happens, and abuse does happen. So I always want children to know how to tell somebody. It's the most important thing, is to tell what is going on. Because like I said, if you're an abuser, if you think about it, you're going to be where children are, and you're not going to want to get caught. It's real important. You're not going to want to get caught. So you're going to do everything in your power not to get caught. And as I was really praying about what to say up here, and I just wanted the Lord to kind of use my words, I wanted to have his words and not mine. He just really put on my heart that if you were an abuser, Amber, you might be in this room right now, learning, what are they doing to stop me? What are they going to be looking for so I know that I don't need to do that? I need to be very careful. Now, that might make you uncomfortable, and it did me a little bit to say that. Thank you, Lord. But I said it because I felt like he told me to. It is uncomfortable, and it is the people that you don't ever expect sometimes that this is going on with. So, and they're going to want to get away with it. They're going to threaten a child with violence, or they're going to tell them not to tell. They're going to say that your parents aren't going to believe you, and that they're going to hate you because of the trouble that you're going to cause in this family. I heard a little boy tell me one time that his abuser told him that everyone would think he was gay. He did not want to tell because he did not want anybody thinking that of him, because he wasn't. And I just wanted to say, to have the open line with a parent or with a special caregiver or an adult, a youth minister, a Sunday school teacher, to be able to talk about it and know that no matter what you tell me, I trust you. I believe you. I'm behind you. Is so, so important to be able to do that. Again, just to have that. I'm not saying I'm parent of the year by any means, but I remember the very first time I ever dropped my son, who's 28 now, the very first time I ever dropped him at someone's house to spend the night. It was a teacher of his, and our sons were the same age, and I dropped him off, and I turned around. We'd had a discussion many times before, and I turned around in the seat as I dropped him off, and I looked back, and he goes, "Mom, I know where my private areas are. I know nobody's allowed to touch them, and I know if they do, I got to tell you." And I said, "Baby, you go have a good time." And so he left my car, and then I went back to pick him up the next day, and when I did, there was a boy in the yard playing with them that I did not know. And come to find out, it was the older brother's friend who had spent the night as well. And fear just came over me. I guess because what we do, fear just came over me, and I kept my cool, kept my calm, and I talked to him about his night and how everything went and how much fun they had and what they did. And then in the course of the conversation, we talked about sleeping arrangements and where everybody slept and what everybody did. And at any time, anywhere, by anybody, were you ever made to feel uncomfortable in any way? No, Mom, I was not. But I know if I did, I could tell you. And I wanted him to know that. And that's what we want our children to know. Because most of the time, children aren't going to tell. Sometimes they're not going to tell their parents. They're going to tell a friend. And if my boy was a friend, heard that, I wanted him to be able to come to me and say, "Mom, Joey needs help." And he didn't want to talk to his mom. And then we could get Joey some help. Another thing, I know I go long, I'm very windy, but another thing that was mentioned already is another conversation to have with your children is social media and online. If they're approached in any way that's inappropriate, online, through social media, in any way, to be able to talk to you about that is crucial. Having that conversation before anything happens is crucial. That they know that they have your trust. They have messed up and maybe sent a picture that was inappropriate that they shouldn't, received a picture that was inappropriate, or that they've just gotten some solicitation that they don't understand, to be able to come to you and know that you're not going to be angry or upset, but you just want to help and you want to get this person to stop. And that's a very important thing. Now, I can tell you that most of the time when it comes to, I've looked at some research on that, most of the time they're not going to tell their parents about things that happen online. they usually go to their friends, and I kind of question that, like, why is that? One thing, they don't think parents understand technology. They don't think parents understand how to relate to them when it comes to their phone, and so their friends do, and their friends understand, and some of their friends have been through what they're going through, so they go to them first. Other reasons is that their fear that their technology is going to be taken away. They're really scared about that, and they don't want their technology taken away. Fear that the parent might be angry or blame them for what has happened. Friends don't react that way normally, so they go to their friends first. But to discuss with your child, if they're not comfortable talking to you, who could they talk to? Is it the youth minister? Is it their pastor? Is it a special aunt? Or a special uncle that they could confide in. Just talking with your child to say, if there's something you just can't say to me, then I want you to be able to go to these people and talk to them. Just discuss with your child those people. Give more awareness and be more aware about your child's social media. Be proactive on that. Discuss the internet. And related issues about the internet. Don't be scared to talk to your child about the internet and the things that are going on, and if this starts to happen to them, what they need to do. Research I've learned has shown that limiting and controlling their internet usage is less effective than having a mutual discussion with your child about the internet. Positive parental response is essential when a child is disclosing to you whether they're your child or they're not your child. A positive response. My very best friend in the whole world called me in a panic and with just terror in her voice that her little girl had just told her that someone in her family had touched her. And I said, you better keep your calm, you keep your cool, and do not show emotion. Just let her tell you her story. And it's very hard for a parent to do that, but she did. And because once a child sees that, oh my gosh, if they can't handle this little bit, they're not going to be able to handle the rest of my story. I better well just not tell. So it's very important to just stay calm. The more that we can encourage and support children to disclose abuse, I think the safer that we can keep them. I talk a long time.
So I am Beth Nicely, and for the past 15 years I have been a counselor for these children, and so I deal with sexual abuse, physical abuse, neglect, and then a variety of other things too because of our school-based program. However, since Amber, who is our forensic interview, stepped into the director position, I'm now stepping into the forensic interview position. I am trained and have done this for fill-ins for many years, so that's my new venture that I'm going to be on. But I am going to talk more about my counseling experience. And one thing I do want to say, we are a community resource. If you have questions, if you need help, that's what we're here for. We've got some people that I know have taken in some children, and they weren't used to behaviors, and they didn't know how to parent these kids. So while the kids were being seen, I took the parents and we sat and we went over their questions and what to do with these situations and needs of the children and what's been going on with them. I do want to say in response to disclosing, when a child does disclose, you don't want to question them to death, and that's where the call to DHR is really important. And I've called Kelly many times and said, I'm not sure if this is a report, but I give her the information, let them decide if it's a report. But you do want to know a lot of information, but let us do that, because it scares a kid and it will cut a kid off. They have only so much information in them, and then they're done. And so that was one of the purposes of the Children's Advocacy Center, so they didn't have to go through multiple interviews. So just try to get the basics and then let them. The other thing is what happens if a child tells you that they're being abused by somebody at home, you also have to be careful with that, because let's say it's a stepdad or a mom's boyfriend and they report, and then you call the parent, which there you have to have policy on, do we call the parent, do we not, do we just call DHR? But if mom gets a hold of that and she tells boyfriend or stepdad, and then they start getting into the child's head and saying things. So many a time we've had children to disclose abuse, and you know, we've got, as trained, we've got ways and things that we look for to know, you know, if they're telling the truth or not. But you don't want them to recant, is what we call, and take back their story and say, no, that didn't really happen. So you do have to be very careful with the information. And I will say there's a lot of things that you can look for as to whether a child is telling the truth. And most of the time they are telling the truth, but not always. I have interviewed a child who said something had happened at school, but when I interviewed her, she couldn't give me any details, no details at all. But a child who's been abused has details. And if they don't change their details, I mean, they stick to their story, you pretty much know that it has happened. Do we get things wrong sometimes? We do. So the more information we have, the better. I do want to say this as far as counseling. One of the number one reasons that children heal well from abuse is when somebody believes them. So it's very important for a parent or caregiver, a grandparent, to believe a child when they have reported abuse, because we see everything. And I've seen a child go into foster care because the mother wouldn't believe the child, even though she had reported to the mother years before and then made another report. And so the child goes into foster care because that she has no support. So we don't want that either. And I'm going to say this. This is not going to be popular, but, excuse me. If you are close to the Holy Spirit, He will pierce your heart when there are things about certain people that just should cause a red flag to go off. And so you just kind of have to pray and wait on the Holy Spirit. But you should be kind of getting some vibes and some little red flags from people who are not safe around kids. And you need to watch things too. People who are rubbing on kids all the time or wanting kids to be by themselves, you look for those types of things. Communication, we talked about that a little bit online or through these social media things. So you do have to be very careful about that. Did you need to say something? Oh, okay. So one of the things, too, I had a lot of things that Amber had also told, but I do want to say this. One of the statistics is that 93% of children know their perpetrator. So, and we see that all the time. It's somebody who has access to a child. And so very few children just have these random perpetrators that, you know, steal them and things like that. So that's why we have to be careful in our churches and our homes and everything like that. And I'm not going to go over, Amber did a really good job about what to look for and those types of things that you're telling children, but I will add this one thing. Talk about secrets. Friends and people tell kids to keep secrets. Now, you're not supposed to tell. If you don't tell anybody, I'll buy you the latest iPhone. I'll buy you a new gaming system. And they do. They will buy them those things. And so you want to talk about secrets. What is an okay secret, like a birthday surprise, or a not okay secret? So that's another thing that would be great for, and those are simple things you can do in church to help and teach kids as well. I am going to say this too, and if you're not a lot of you know and have seen Officer Gomez on Facebook. He's a good person to follow because he really teaches you the social media ins and outs, what to do with your kids, and how to navigate this social media, because that's what we're seeing, crazy things all the time about people luring kids and just all kinds of things. It's gotten out of hand. So let me say this. I will add a few things that you can look for in children. Physical signs, if you're a parent or even in a situation like that, now some of these things would be parent only that they would see. If you see bleeding or bruising, if they are getting urinary tract infections a lot, if they are acting out sexually in ways that are not age appropriate for them. So sometimes that's an indicator of sexual abuse, but not always. But again, you're looking for things that are out of the ordinary to try to take care of these children. There's a lot of behavioral signs, though. Now, this could be abuse, but it could also be other normal things with kids at school. But you do want to look for the depression, when they quit enjoying life, and you see that kind of leaves them. If younger children return to regressive behaviors like they're sucking their thumb or they're wetting the bed at night. Wetting the bed for me is when somebody says, I think this kid needs to be seen. That's a big red flag if they, because you always check out health-related things, but if nothing pans out, why are they wetting the bed and they were previously potty trained? If kids are running away, they don't want to go to school, nightmares are a big thing, not wanting to leave a parent's side because of fear. So a lot of those things indicate something's not right. So, let's kind of see, let's go further and see if something is going on. Another unpopular thing is, and I'm sorry to say this, and I'm going to pass this off on Dr. James Dobson, and many of y'all know him from Focus on the Family, but in churches and in babysitting, he recommended that teenage boys do not babysit or care for children. Now, obviously, if they're in a group, then that's going to be different, but he said that's just such an intense hormonal time, and just don't tempt the boys, because we do see a lot of teen boys perpetrating on younger children, and they are siblings and people they have access to. So I know these are hard things that you all have to hear, but that is why churches are beginning to set up, the rule of more than two adults, not a single adult, and all kinds of good safety policies. You need that. If you have any questions at all about how to handle things or counseling, we provide our services free of charge, and that's one of the beautiful things about the Children's Advocacy Center. You don't have to pay for anything. And so we are here to help children in that way.
Thank you so much, Beth. Amber, let me ask you, can you tell us approximately how many children y'all see a month that are victims?
That can really range. That can range through counseling. We see lots through counseling. We have 7 counselors that go into our city and county school system. So, and then we have clients that come after school as well. But on average, like I said, on average per year, I was thinking we see around 130 kids a year,
okay,
as on average. So for interviews, okay. Now, not all those interviews are children, like this, and some that are reported and they're just not sure, and DHR is kind of like, I don't know either. Why don't we just do a CAC and we'll make sure? So I do a CAC and we talk, and some kids don't disclose. And some kids do. Sometimes, I hate to say this, but there's a lot of some custody battles sometimes, where a parent may just accuse another parent, and then when we talk with the child, we see that there was nothing there. But again, we see most of our clients, I would say, I know most of the people children I talk to have been abused. Yes. Disclose abuse.
How do you receive your clients? How do they come to you?
Yes, only by DHR. DHR makes that
Referral.
appointment by referral. We don't take referrals. Now, you can call us, like Beth said, and we'll walk you through and tell you exactly what you need to do, which is called DHR, because they are the state agency that takes those reports. Then they will call the investigators, unless it's vice versa. Sometimes investigators get the report first, they'll call DHR, and then they'll make an appointment with us at the Advocacy Center. I've had them call and say, hey, can we come right now? And they come. And then I've had them call and say, can we make an appointment for next Tuesday? And they've done that. So, and then again, the DHR will go out and make an initial contact with the child and just ask them a few questions. And when they see that, yeah, there's something here, I'm going to stop talking. Investigators do the same thing. Okay, we just need a CAC, because as Beth mentioned, a child will shut down, and they don't want to tell this over and over and over. They need to tell it one time. And that's what we hope to provide for them, is that one time, so they don't have to do that.
You all do like how to spot a predator training. You do that through the schools?
We do with the children?
No.
Okay, yeah.
With
no,
adults.
with
Like
adults.
what I was thinking was, if one of the churches wanted to have somebody come in and talk to them about how to spot a predator, would your organization offer that, or is there somebody? Does anybody know of anybody
we have
locally?
Never done that. No. Yes, I think
Okay.
we could put something together for
Because
that.
I think
but-
that's one thing our churches would need help with, is how to spot. We've mentioned behavior, watching and everything, but what to watch for. What is excessive hugging? How much is too much candy? Is somebody taking someone to the restroom by themselves, a child, which is a no-no. Those kind of things. I'm thinking that perhaps some of our churches, need to know, perhaps could use some training, on what behavior to look for. What does a predator look like? What are his tendencies? And I say he, it can be a woman, but most of the time it's a man. To be able to recognize behavior.
Yeah, and I think that's it. It's
Okay.
not as much a person or a gender or an age. It's more, what does the actions look like?
Right.
Because grooming can be a lot of different actions, but yeah.
Right. Okay. Thank y'all so very much. We're going to move to Judge Bell and Summer. They are on the front line of prosecuting these perpetrators, and we'll let them talk about what they see in their line and offer some helpful advice or information to you. So whichever one wants to go first, however y'all want to do it.
I'm going to stand up. I'm not used to talking while sitting down, and if you aren't used to that, it's actually very difficult to do if you're used to doing it on your feet. I've got a short PowerPoint just to kind of help me stay on topic, because all of these things that everyone's talking about, these are things that all of us could spend many, many hours talking to you about. So I'm going to try to kind of stay on point a little bit, and I know Judge Bell talked to me earlier in the week a little bit about what he's going to talk about, so I'm going to try not to tread on what he has planned also. If we can go to slide 2, please. Just to kind of give you an idea of a few things that I just want to touch on. I'm not going to talk too much about child abuse statistics. We've heard some of those. I am going to talk to you a little bit about how to take those statistics. I took a research methods class in college, and the only thing I remember from the whole class, the very first day, the professor said, beware of numbers because you can make them mean anything you want. So I'm going to talk just a little bit about kind of how should you process statistics when you get them. Also, just some things to keep in mind. And also, everybody's thinking, what can I do? So I just have a few suggestions there. If we can jump to slide number 5, please. So types of abuse. I know this may be difficult to see. These numbers came from the National Children's Alliance. So out of abuse cases, about 3/4, about 76% of abuse cases have to do with neglect. So neglect is kind of what you think it would be. It's somebody who's not providing what a child needs: food, shelter, clothes, education, maybe medical attention, emotional support. All those sorts of things come under the umbrella of neglect. About 10% is physical abuse. So that's hitting, pushing, slapping, cutting, all the things that you can do to somebody, but to a child. So that's about 10% of cases. This is nationally. That's too small. I didn't see that. It's actually 16% is physical, 10% is sexual, and 0.2% is sex trafficking, which, as we know, that's something that's become more and more, and we can thank the internet for that also. If we can go to the next slide, please. So when I say warning, statistics don't always show the whole picture, and here's what I mean by that. So just because maybe a crime rate goes up or the number of sexual abuse cases go up, that does not necessarily mean that those crimes have gone up. That doesn't mean that more people are hurting their kids. It may, but it doesn't necessarily. What it may mean is that the education programs that schools and churches have in places may be working. So that means that children are disclosing. That means that adults in their life are looking at them and going, whoa, something's not right here. I need to tell somebody. So if it all works the way it should, the numbers should go up, because that means that children that are being abused are talking about it more, and the adults in their life are noticing it and speaking out on their behalf more. A prime example of this is when school starts back every year. Generally, DHR gets a lot more reports. It's not because there's a lot more abuse in the month of August, but it's because the months before that, the kids have not been at school and there haven't been responsible adults in their life to kind of be a check on that. So that's when I just say, be careful sometimes when you see numbers. Sometimes because those numbers go up, sometimes it might actually be a good sign, because all the things that we are all talking about, the plans the churches are making of getting the information out to members may actually be working. And if it does, then you will see an uptick. That being said, a lot of the numbers of cases that involve children do involve the internet, do involve these handheld computers right here. This is a wonderful and terrible thing all at the same time for all of us. And we'll talk about that a little bit more also. If you can jump 2 slides, please. I just wanted to mention, you have the team here, the multidisciplinary team, or the team as we often refer to it, is made up of the Children's Advocacy Center, the Department of Human Resources, law enforcement, which includes Josh. Josh is there quite a bit, as well as the Sheriff's Office, Rainsville Police Department, the juvenile probation officers, and also the District Attorney's Office. So just to kind of give y'all an idea, the purpose of the team is so that once a month, everybody sits down. It's during the lunch hour. We eat lunch together. We talk. We catch up. We discuss things that are going on. But the main thing we do is we share information. Because sometimes we'll find that there may be a case that law enforcement's working, that maybe the CAC has provided counseling at some point, or DHR has had previous reports. So sometimes that allows us to share information and get all of that together. and see if there is something that we can do to prosecute a case, because that's what my office does. The District Attorney's Office for the 9th Judicial Circuit covers DeKalb and Cherokee counties. We are responsible for all felony prosecutions in the circuit and a whole lot of the misdemeanors also. We also do child support enforcement on behalf of DHR. We do juvenile court. We do forfeitures for law enforcement. We do a lot of things, but that includes child abuse and child sex abuse cases. Let's see if we can go to the next slide, please. All right, I'm going to give you a couple of things to kind of keep in mind. We don't always know what happens in other people's homes, and that's kind of been a theme up here. And that's what I'd ask you to keep in mind. We don't know what goes on in other people's homes. We see them when they're real cleaned up, usually. We see them at church. We see them at the grocery store. We see them on Facebook, which we all know that that's probably not real life, okay? I certainly don't put the pictures of me looking ragged up there if I can help it. Other people may. I try not to. So we see the best versions of people often. We don't know what's going on in their home. We don't know what kind of family dynamic they have going on. We don't know about the people that may be in the home that we don't know. There's lots of things we don't know. Sexual abuse is often generational. This is something that we will see where a family member will come in and make a disclosure, and we've got a big old flow chart by the time we're done. Because then it comes out that maybe a cousin was also had the same thing happen to them. Maybe a sibling, maybe an aunt, maybe an uncle, maybe grandchildren. And sometimes there are times that stretches over multiple generations. And at some point, we've got to stop it. So think about you as a child, or if you have young children or around young children. I have an almost 2-year-old. His reality, what he thinks is normal, is what I establish for him that's normal. So children think whatever it is that they have going on at home, whatever people do to them, they think that's normal because they don't have any other way to know. I mean, that's how we learn. So sometimes it takes people years and years to realize things that happen to them were abuse. And I'm talking sometimes people are 18, 19, 20 on up that will sometimes come and make a disclosure to law enforcement or somebody else that, hey, so this thing happened to me back when I was 4, 5, 6, 7 by this person. But it's taken all these years for them to realize that what happened to them was not okay and was not their fault, because that's what people often think. So we have to keep that in mind also. So children often disclose abuse to other children. Amber mentioned this, and you can tell what kind of business we're in because Judge Bell and I both brought a child with us today. But that also shows you how important we think it is that children understand that there are dangers in the world and that children have the vocabulary to be able to talk about those things, protect themselves, but also be a protector for other people. Something else that's really important, and DHR sees this a whole lot, but even if parents are abusers of whatever sort, physical, emotional, sexual, their children still love them. Their children still love them. You can take them out of their house and they'll fight it every bit of the way because they love their parents, because that's the natural order of things. And everything that is done affects the child. So these are all why it's so important that we have programs in schools and churches so that children know what is okay and what's not in case they're not getting the good information at home. We can go to the next slide, please. Okay, so what can you do? The number one thing I would ask you to do is pray. Okay? Whether you have names or not, pray, because there are people, I guarantee there are people in this room who have been victims of abuse of some sort. I guarantee. If you look at statistics, that would bear that out. Pray for not only the victims, but pray for families. Because if I look at it coming out of my office, if we have a case against somebody, there's enough information collected in the investigative stage between DHR and law enforcement and the CAC that we can prosecute something, that we think there can be a charge. You know, Facebook world is one thing, reality is something else. When you're in the courthouse and you're seeing family on both sides that are affected by that, crying their eyes out, knowing that their lives are forever changed by this person's actions as well, these people need prayer. Everybody does. There's something that I often refer to sometimes as secondhand trauma as well. Everybody at all of these offices deal with these cases. And don't get me wrong, they're not the victims. None of us are victims. But everybody that has to deal with these sorts of cases, it wears on you after a while. Even if it's the admin person answering the phone or putting stuff in a file, because you see it, you hear it, you talk to the victims, you talk to their families. Pray for everybody involved. Don't jump to conclusions. That goes back to you don't know what's happening in somebody else's house. Be the eyes and ears of the community. And again, we've talked about reporting. If you see something or you hear something that's not right, report it. And I'm going to go a step farther. Don't just be the reporter. If we have a case against somebody and you have information that would be helpful, help us. Help us help them. Nobody wants to testify in court. Let me say that. Nobody wants to testify in court. I've done it before. It's not fun. But the only way that we can get earthly justice through the criminal justice system is if we have people willing to show up and speak out. Nothing I say is evidence. Nothing I say really counts in court, quite frankly. I just present it, and my office presents it. But we have to have the people with the knowledge who are willing to show up and to say what happened's not right, or I saw these things and they weren't right. I think we've already talked about listen without judgment when somebody tries to tell you something. I think CAC covers that very well, since that's what they do every day. Talk to your children. Amber talked about that also. Give them vocabulary to talk about what goes on and also to protect themselves. Challenge your own stereotypes and prejudices. So this isn't just for children, this is for anybody. We had a trial some years ago. It was a rape trial. And here's some things that we heard from jurors. She didn't look like a victim. She shouldn't have gotten on that motorcycle with that guy. If it had been my wife, she'd have fought more. So on and so on. Challenge your own stereotypes of what somebody who looks a certain way or does certain things. They deserve the same protection from all of us as everybody else does. And then, of course, at the bottom I have watch what your children do online. We've already talked about that. But I can't tell you the number of cases that we have. Talk to your children about what's appropriate contact. So there's this lovely little app called Snapchat. I don't know if anybody knows that. Snapchat and a lot of apps like that have location on it. And if you don't go in and figure out how to turn it off, if I'm on Snapchat, anybody else who's my friend on Snapchat can see exactly where I am in that moment. And there are lots of apps like that. Also, let's talk about friends on social media, which you should talk to your children about. Are they real people? Are they real people that they know? Or are they just somebody who sent a friend request with a made-up name? These are things to talk to children about because these are what predators do. Predators are looking for somebody who will accept their friend request, who will start chatting with them on these apps, and the next thing you know, you've got something inappropriate coming across. I can guarantee it. And it's something you don't want your child or grandchild to see or to ever have to tell somebody about. So give them those resources up front so that get in that kind of situation. But also talk to them about, if that happens, to come to you immediately. So one thing technology has done for us is law enforcement is catching up, okay? And even the tech companies, which usually aren't our friends, are starting to develop things to try to find child pornography or predators online. Okay, there are a whole task force all over the country that only work on these things. And you will see more and more, we have more cases of electronic solicitation, of possession or dissemination of child pornography. That's because of this new technology and the fact that law enforcement is being trained on how to catch these people. And they are doing it. They are working on it. They are sitting there looking through all this garbage so that our children won't have to, so that we can catch these predators and do something with them. You can go to the next slide, please. So a couple of things just to keep in mind about the criminal justice system. So everybody up here kind of represents a different part of the system. So DHR, like Denise was talking about, their background checks. So they have indicated reports or not indicated reports. All those things, what they do, and when they have to sometimes remove children from custody, that's one thing. What we do for criminal justice is something else. And the proof that is required, the evidence that is required for those things versus what I do and my office does, are sometimes very different. So sometimes people say, well, why, if they remove the children, why can't you prosecute? Well, the burden's higher, number one. Participating in the criminal justice system often re-victimizes those who have already suffered. And the end of a case is not the end for the victim or the family. And the biggest thing is, just because a case is not prosecuted does not mean that we don't believe the victim. There are many, many cases that me, that Josh, that Denise at the CAC, that we believe what somebody has told us, but we know we don't have enough evidence to go to court. And that's very frustrating for everybody. But I'm going to ask you to participate in an exercise with me. So as y'all know, it wasn't that long ago that I was campaigning for this office. I have only officially been the district attorney since January. And I got a lot of questions about, why don't you just take everything to court? Why do people get to enter guilty pleas? Why do y'all work out deals with people? I want you to participate in an exercise with me. Imagine yourself right now, whatever stage you're in, the worst thing that you can think of to happen to you has happened to you. Whatever that is, I'll let you fill in the blank. The worst thing somebody could do to you, they've done. Somebody that you know, somebody that you trust, maybe somebody that lives in the house with you, they've done this to you. You've had to talk to law enforcement, you've had to be poked, you've had to be prodded, you've had to have pictures taken of you. You've had to tell all sorts of people what happened to you immediately, like all right then. And now maybe you go to counseling to try to deal with it. Maybe you have PTSD from what happened. Maybe you have flashbacks. Maybe you can't sleep at night. Now we get time for a trial. And we ask you, come to our office, sit down with us, and I'm going to need to show you this interview that you gave. I'm going to need to show you these pictures of yourself. I'm going to need to show you the statements that you made way back then. And now I'm going to need you to sit, and I'm going to need you to tell me what happened, because I'm prepping you for trial. Now we're to trial. So now you're going to go in a courtroom where there's a judge and a court reporter who's looking at everything you say and writing down everything you say. And there's a judicial assistant, and there's somewhere between 12 and 14 people that you don't know in the jury box staring at you, waiting to see what you say. You've got prosecutors at the state's table. You've got your law enforcement representative. You've got members of the defendant's family and friends. You've got maybe your mama, your daddy, your spouse, your children, your best friends. They're all sitting over here. And right in front of you, you've got the defense attorney and the person that did all these terrible things to you. Now, it's my job to get up and to look at you and to get you to walk me through everything that happened to you on the worst day of your life, the worst thing that you could ever imagine happened to you. I'm going to need you to tell me what you're doing before, what you're dressed like. I'm going to need you to tell me what you saw, what you smelled, what you tasted. I'm going to need you to walk me through in great detail exactly what happened to you. So now I want you to take, however you are now, I want you to imagine now that you're 16 and I ask you to do that. Imagine that you're 10 and I ask you to do that. Imagine that you are 6 years old and I have to do that. Do you see why sometimes victims may not be able to get on the stand? I've had adults tell me on the phone, because that's the only contact I can have with them. They won't even give us their address. They won't give us their address because they're so scared. And they say, I've left the state and I'm not coming back. I'm not coming back to the state. I'm not coming back to the town. I'm not going to be in the same building with that person. Do the best you can. At the same time, had 8-year-olds. Did wonderfully. Knocked it out of the park. There's a trial with Judge Bell just about a year or so ago. 8-year-old knocked it out of the park. I've had 12-year-olds sit and look at me when their parents straddle the room and say, I don't know why my parents are pushing this. I can't do this and I'm not going to do it. It's hard. There are a lot of things that go into trying to prosecute a case. Not that long ago, we had a case, we had people in, several siblings, the mama, had them in several days that week trying to work with them, trying to get them comfortable telling the story, get them comfortable with the courtroom. Came back over the weekend, came in on Monday, and one of the girls couldn't even look at anybody, more or less answer a question. The mama was shaking. Said, we've had a terrible weekend, and I don't know how we're going to do this. That particular case ended up not having to go to a trial. The defendant entered a guilty plea that morning, and they were okay with it, and it is not what they would have wanted. They wanted more. We wanted more. But based on what they thought they could do, that's the best that we could do, and they were satisfied. And he's a registered sex offender. There's a lot that goes into these cases. And I just want to give a little bit of explanation so that y'all know kind of what goes behind a case. And when we're done with the file, we have to move on to the next one. Because, that's what we do. That's our job. But when a case is done, whether it's been a jury trial or not, whether it's a guilty or not guilty, whatever, whether somebody's sentenced to life or given probation, it's not over for the victim. It's never over for them. They have to continue on. And I really think that's the message that we all need to keep in mind at all times.
I need to stand up too, and I provided a slideshow to Brother David about a week ago, getting ready for this. And I'll tell you, my inspiration to participate in this came about 3 months ago, or maybe last year. Summer knows the case that I was involved in, and there's about 3 church cases that I'm going to tell you about. 3 cases where the church interacted with the court. And I'm going to tell you, I'm going to let you judge about how the church handled themselves, or at least 2 that I can think of off the top of my memory. One of which was the one that I've got most of the slides involved in, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But as I walked into that case that I'll talk to, which I've got most of the slides geared toward that case, I was in Cherokee County, sitting in court, and I was coming in to sentence a young man. He was applying for probation. And the court in Cherokee County, they've got one major courtroom and one small one. And as you walk into the major courtroom there in Cherokee County, it's a pretty good sized room that would probably go from where Brother David sits to maybe over here to about where DL's sitting. Maybe maybe not that big, but it's a pretty good-sized courtroom. And the defendant, of course, is sitting in front of me with his lawyer. And behind him, the middle section, which is there clearly to support him, is row after row after row after row of his family, church, and the church family sitting there, Christian school officials. And when you see these slides in a minute, understand when it says senior pastor at blank First Baptist, that's not Rainsville. Okay, so you can let David off the hook. It's not anybody you know, I don't think. And when it says blank Christian school, that's not Cornerstone. I have used it's a different community over in Georgia, but they came over and they're there to support the defendant. Meanwhile, on the right side of the court, where I'm sitting, to my right, which would be the left if you're walking in the back, there is a man and his wife. And, of course, Summers' office has a victim's representative sitting over there. But other than Summers' staff that came to sit with them and the man and wife, which is the father of the 11-year-old child that was molested, that's all that's there for them. And in the middle of the section, when I say church family, that's literally the church family that adopted this defendant into their home, I guess, or into their church home. But he's also the cousin or the uncle to the 11-year-old. Understand that. And so his grandmother is the mother of the child. Is the brother. His grandmother is the mother to the father of the child. So they're all related. And that's how he got access to the child. And it's because the daddy had talked to his wife and said, look, my mother needs to be involved in our child's life, and it won't hurt to go over and spend the night. I know it's his nephew. I know my nephew, 20-something-year-old, and he hasn't got out of the house yet, but he's a good guy. And he volunteers at the local fire department. He's volunteer assistant football coach at one of the high schools over in Cherokee County. He's around kids all the time. He wants to be around kids. He's involved in kids, which is something you may see a lot. And nobody could believe little Billy was involved in getting involved. And I'm changing his name. Nobody could believe it. Nobody came and sat for that 11-year-old child. And as I sat, and we'll go through these quotes in a minute, as I sat and listened to it, I became incensed at the impression that the church was giving to the court system about what kind of support they give to a victim. And absolutely incensed. It made me mad. I called one of my pastor friends and I said, we have got to do something to educate the church about how silly this looks, how embarrassing it looks. And I appreciate the brother's comments about our responsibility. It is sin. And we need to be aware of that. And how silly we look by the time we've gone to sentencing. And if you pull up that second slide, I stole this from Summer. I saw her give a presentation, and she made the mistake of giving me a copy of it. So now I adopt it as my work, and she had nothing to do with it. And you notice that. And so let me look at, when you look at the criminal felony procedure, I put that up there, and I'm not going to go through a law professor-like situation with you and bore you till you're asleep. I'll wait till you come to my church, and I'll preach to you and put you to sleep just the same. But you got to understand, by the time you get to trial, you've started out with police intervention, right? You've seen an investigator like Josh York. Somebody's went and reported to the police. He's began to investigate the case. And if in a child sex abuse case, he's referred it over to DHR. DHR's gotten involved. They've gotten CAC involved. So you've went through that. By the time he investigates the case, then he's went down to the clerk's office and signed a complaint saying, hey, I think Billy Bob has molested this kid, or sex abuse, or enticing a child, or whatever a sodomy, rape, sacket. There's a plethora of sexual crimes that they can get charged with depending on the circumstances that wind up with us. And once he signs the complaint and they've screened it, the DA's office has screened it and said, yes, there's probable cause, then there's sometimes in a case like this, the defendant is arrested immediately, and that's when it makes the papers. And y'all start crying out for him to give them $60 million bonds and all this stuff, because it's easy to put all that stuff on Facebook. But the Constitution says they got to get a bond. That's just what it says. It's pesky sometimes, but you got to give them a bond, and so they get a bond, and the defendant gets arrested, Then they go in front of a district judge and they get a preliminary hearing where there's a hearing to determine if there's probable cause to substantiate the arrest. Then if they make it through those steps, then Summers' office goes and presents this to a grand jury, which is 18 people selected from a cross-section of the community, and they determine if there's probable cause to issue an arrest or issue an indictment, a true bill. And so that's when a felony case is initiated. And yes, I understand the saying, sometimes you're sitting in church and you can't understand Deacon Billy's gotten arrested. He's gone to the grand jury, and you'll say, well, they can indict a ham sandwich. And that's true. I agree. That's why we have trial. They indict a ham sandwich. So I see if you're in the church and you don't believe Billy is guilty at all, then he's made it through the grand jury process, and at that point you're fussing at the DA's office for prosecuting an innocent man. Then you go down to arraignment, right? And then once he gets to arraignment, he gets a chance to either plead not guilty or not guilty by reason of mental disease or defect. We set him for trial. And so once he gets set for trial, 98% of all cases, whether it's criminal, civil, domestic, settle. So when you see out beside it guilty plea, most people will enter a guilty plea of some type. Most people. And so either a guilty plea or it'll be dismissed or it'll be worked out, one way or the other. But then if that doesn't work out, they go to a trial where they come to court to be presumed innocent, and 12 members of the community is selected, and they hear what the evidence that the state has, they hear the evidence the defense attorney puts on, and then a jury makes a decision, are they guilty or are they innocent? And if they're found guilty, they set for sentencing. So let's assume in the scenario I had a while ago, that young man, where I'm going to put the quotes up in just a second, that young man has skipped through all of those, and he's gotten down and he's pled guilty to sexual abuse in the first degree, which means he was touching on his cousin in inappropriate ways. And I'm cleaning that up for you. But it means he was touching on his cousin, and he's pled guilty. He skipped through all those procedures. So you would think, if you go to church with him, or you've met him in church, that you'd think, well, now, Billy went through all that, and he said he was guilty. So if I'm going to go to court for him, and I'm going to sit there in court and act like Billy's a good guy, I might need to warn Billy that I'm not going to go in there and tell that judge that I'd trust him with my own kids. I'm not going to go in there and tell that judge that, hey, Billy has just misunderstood. I'm going to go in there and probably tell him that, Billy's made a mistake, and I'm going to be an accountability partner for him from now on. We're going to watch him. That might be it. But before I get to these clips, the second case that I had, and if you're the guy in here that called me, I know who he is, and I don't see him in here, so I can tell this story. Denise put me on a probation from going to foster parents because I made foster parents cry one time because I was too blunt with foster parents about the reality of foster parenting. But so if you're the person that's called me, you just understand. I had a young man come in front of me for sentencing. The original trial judge had recused. And so once he had recused, he'd wound up with me, and I'd not sat through the guilty plea. I didn't even know. You got to understand, we've got hundreds of cases that come through the system. So when he calls me, brother so-and-so calls me and says, I need to talk to you about Billy Bob. Billy Bob's name don't ring a bell. I don't know what he entered a plea of guilty to. He didn't enter it in front of me. And let me just stop you right there. It is not appropriate for you to call a judge about somebody that's awaiting sentencing. Like she said, you've got to go to court. And you need to get on the stand. But they did. They called me, and I said, I don't know who Billy Bob is. Well, just to understand, go easy on him. He's a good guy, and he's trying to get his life. He's got his life straight, and he's going to church with me now. I automatically assume he's like 98% of every other person we got. He's got a drug addiction. He started going to church, and with drug addicts, we've got a lot of hope that they can be turned around. Understand that, and we need to have ministry. That's what I assume. I get to the office, I pull the file of Billy Bob and look, and Billy Bob has pled guilty to raping his biological 13-year-old child when she's over there for visitation. So when I look at that, obviously understand, okay, he's pled guilty. He's entered a plea and taken an agreed-upon sentence, and now it's just up to me to give him probation or not. I immediately sent the defense attorney and the plaintiff in the state an email saying, I've had contact with somebody about this case, because that's what I'm ethically required to do. The one reason you can't call me privately is because I have to make it public. Kind of like your sins be shouted from the rooftop. But anyway, so I threw that in. But anyway, he called me, so I had to email had to email the lawyers and tell them. And so I invited him. I said, brother, you need to come on down here to court if you're going to get on here and say this. And his position was, well, Billy Bob's come to my church. Billy Bob has told me that not only he didn't do it, but he just pled guilty because he knew the jury would believe her over him. And so he just pled guilty so he wouldn't have to go to prison. And he just did it just to say he did it to get it behind him. What you don't need to understand, before somebody gets you in that position, first of all, those are two examples. Before somebody gets you in that position, a condition of the guilty plea is you have to answer a question. Now, are you pleading guilty because you are in fact guilty? The answer to that question is yes. Then he's given up his rights to everything else above him, and he's saying, I did it. I did it. So when he got to court and I confronted his lawyer and I confronted him about it, and I said, he's going to have somebody here that wants to take the stand and say he didn't do it. And that he only took a guilty plea, and it's a fraud upon the court. And if he's saying that he didn't do it and he wants to set it aside, let's set it aside and let's have a trial. And of course, his defense attorney starts saying, his defense attorney went to that brother and told him to leave. He said, that's not what we need. We don't want a trial. And when the brother left, of course, the defendant got on the stand at his own sentencing and said, yes, I did it. And Bob Johnston, who was the assistant DA at the time, began asking him questions. And he said, look, she was my daughter. She was over there on a visitation. I'd had a fuss with my girlfriend. I was drinking, and that's what happened. And he forced himself upon his 13-year-old biological daughter. I want you to understand that's what we deal with. And that may be a little blunt, but before you as church members start dismissing the 13-year-old girl's allegations and saying she's making it up, it's one thing to say she's making it up when he's indicted and you want to come to court and say, well, she says she got raped on September the 6th. I was with him on September the 6th, and she wasn't anywhere around. That's one thing. You come to trial, he puts you on the stand, and you go through that. That's what you have to do. I get that. You're innocent until proven guilty. But by the time he's pled guilty, you're singing out of a different songbook when you tell the judge he really didn't do it. Now, if we can go to the next slides. The guy we talked about in Cherokee County, these are some of the things that I received. Letters I received are people that took the stand and said, quote from a retired bookkeeper at Defendant's Local School Board, which was a local Christian school over there on the edge of Georgia. I honestly believe Billy has been falsely accused of a crime he did not commit. These charges, I love this was rich, these charges can ruin a young man's reputation for a lifetime, regardless that he ruined the 11-year-old girl's life for the rest of her life. My hope is that Your Honor will dismiss any charges against blank, and he can move forward with his life. At sentencing, I don't have the power to dismiss it, and one. And then two, who in the right man would dismiss a case when he's pled guilty? He came in and said he pled guilty. Here's a Sunday school teacher and VBS director at local school. She was VBS director at her church, but director at a local Christian school. I consider Billy as family. He has been a great friend of myself and many others. And Billy is always welcome at my home and around my family. I am very proud of Billy for dedicating his time as a volunteer firefighter. Billy is a great example of honest, hard-working young man. Next slide. It don't end there. Oh, she's director of the school. Thank you, Summers. Yeah, she's director of the school where the child went. And understand, the child's an 11-year-old girl. 11-year-old girl. And some of these letters you'll see are talking about how much, if I send him to prison, how much it's going to affect his life. And these are people that know both sides of the family. The daddy of the child is heartbroken because he feels like he put his kid in that situation by allowing his kid to go see his mother. So he's heartbroken. Mama's heartbroken, obviously, because her daughter's been molested. That's obvious. And so and then another thing that breaks their heart is that the paternal family has completely cut them off because everybody, including the grandmother, believes that they're all liars. And they believe the 11-year-old child's a liar. She's always lied about something or another. So she's lying about this, right? I mean, that's the mentality. Senior pastor at Defendant's Local Church. Billy is a very hardworking man that I would trust any time, I love this, around my family and my home. He would never mistreat anyone or take advantage of them. because of his honesty and trustworthiness. I would say Billy is a great example of an exemplary citizen of Cherokee County. I would entrust Billy with my own children. I'll capitalize that for you. With my own children without any doubt in my mind. I pray that you pray and ask God for wisdom and guidance before making any decision. I am available anytime to discuss the moral character of Billy. Well, that anytime discussion comes in court, one. And two, the part of with my own children. Now, I've got to type up sentencing orders a lot, and I had put a line in my sentencing order that said anybody that would get on the stand and would tell a judge that they would trust a child molester who's already said he pled guilty with their own children without any doubt in my mind should repent, get on their knees, and seek greater wisdom from God, because he gives that to you freely if you ask, and evaluate your own life and your own parent style. My wife, who is a voice of reason in my home, when I read that to her and said, I'm going to read this to them, I'm going to type this up, she said, you're being a little too hard. You're going after the witnesses. You're not going after the defendant. And she told me as I was on the way out here today to calm down and not get too upset. So I'm trying not to. But let me say, when you see somebody that's an 11-year-old girl and a 13-year-old child, respectively, or any child that's been molested, and you see people get on the stand, they're supposed to know better, and say stuff like that, it's offensive. Now, if I'm an unbelieving judge, how do you think I view the church? Now, next slide. Director at a local Christian school, again, where the child goes, I could go on with story after story like this, describing Billy and his pure heart and intentions. His heart for others is evident in his service with the blank fire department and working with the blank football team. Boy, he was around a lot of kids, by the way. I pray as you make a decision, you prayerfully take this into account. Next slide. Defendant's girlfriend's father, who defendant had a girlfriend that was age appropriate. See, a lot of times we think, well, if these sex offenders have somebody in their life that's their age, they won't be offending on our children. This guy had a girlfriend, and oftentimes they do. They have a girlfriend or a wife. Sometimes they don't, but in this case he did. And this guy was a correctional officer at a prison facility somewhere, I think in Georgia. He came up to testify for him. He said, I can assure you I fully revealed Billy's book, True Character. Believe me, anyone who intends to date my daughter will have to check out with me. And Billy has shown me he treats my daughter with all respect and is a very caring young man who I can trust. I would like to add, I am very good at reading people's characters, personalities, intentions, and behaviors. I deal with hundreds of people on a daily basis in my profession. I can identify someone who tells the truth versus someone who doesn't. I can trust Billy because he is an honest man who has good intentions. I can assure you I would not provide a good character recommendation letter to anyone who did not deserve it. He also took the witness stand. You have no idea what a child molester looks like. He's a correctional officer. You have no idea what a murderer looks like. You know, when the Bible says all have sinned and come short of the glory of God, that means me. It means you. All of us have. But for the grace of God, there go I. They don't look any different a lot of times than what you look, obviously. Understand that. If we go to the next slide, again, I'm picking. Okay, I think we went back one. If we, I don't want to repeat it. I'm already getting fired up. I guess go to the next slide. And what support did the victim receive? I wrote this in my order. These are quotes that I put in my order. The victim's parents appeared alone, except for members of the district attorney's victim services team when they came to court. The victim's family received blame for allegations that turned out to be true by the defendant's own admission. He admitted to sexually abusing an 11-year-old child that was also his cousin. To tell you how the court date played out that day, Summer was prosecuting a case, and she got up and she let the defense attorney, at a sentencing hearing or a probation hearing, the defendant goes first. And so the defendant has a chance to put on their testimony and what they have. And, of course, they spend a lot of time talking about they're a good guy. And so they're a good guy, they're good people, and they do all these wonderful and great things. And so, you know, that's generally how it goes. When I was a defense attorney, you spent most of your time talking about how good a guy they were, right? So she lets them unfold and do all that. And meanwhile, all these church folks are sitting here. Then she waits her turn, and she pulls the TV out that we've got there in television, we've got there in court, and she plugs in her thumb drive of the defendant's statement to the police. Because the police had put it on body cam when they sat and interviewed him, or had a camera in, maybe not body cam, they had a camera in there in the room, I believe. Josh Summerford here, he can tell you about that, and Josh York, but it was over in Cherokee Sheriff's Office, and they had an interview room set up, and they had a camera in there. As they're sitting there talking to him, the young man is rubbing his britches, and he's rubbing his hands, and he's scratching his head because he's having to talk to people in authority, and he feel like, I guess, he's getting caught, and he's making his lies, and he's talking about this, and he's talking about that. Finally, about 20 minutes in, maybe he went that long. He said, I don't want you to think bad of me. But he starts tearing up, and he said, I did it. I did this. And then he starts describing it in graphic detail exactly what he did. When he did it, how he was there, what happened. He lays it all out for all of us on a 70-inch TV. And you would think, I thought, okay, now I've got some church folks here who are not used or accustomed to hearing this kind of talk. They're not accustomed to hearing this kind of talk, this kind of graphic detail. It's not something they're used to. This is where there'll be a mass exodus out of the courtroom and they won't support him anymore. Nobody left. They all sat there with him. And then after I heard it, and I, of course, denied his probation and sent him to prison, they gathered in the lobby of the courthouse crying and wailing and talked about how sorry the judge was. And so as we go to the next slide, Theodore Roosevelt had a quote that I like to use. The court and the public must also remember the terrible price that has been paid and is still being paid by the victim's current family members. Oftentimes, victims are forgotten because emotional men and women always see only the individual whose fate is up at the moment, neither his victim nor the many millions of unknown individuals who would be in the long run harmed by what they ask. If I did what the church in that case had asked me to do, how many other girls would he have had access to? As we try to close out, I see it's 3:52. Let me say this for Brother David. I'm going to say this on behalf of Brother David Cofield. Take that clock down. He preaches when the Spirit gets through with him, he'll stop. Right? He don't need a time limit. But as I see it, I get the message. I got to wrap it up. So as we go to the last slide, the victim's embarrassed, and they can all tell you that. Victim's embarrassed from my situation that I see them. They've got shame. They've got confusion. The victims I see when they come to court. Should they be embarrassed? Should they be ashamed? They didn't do anything wrong, but that's natural. Remember, suffer the little children and forbid them not to come unto me, for such is the kingdom of heaven. Matthew 19:14. What do we do as a church? So we go to the last slide. In my opinion, this is me as a minister here. What does the victim need? Needs a listener with compassion. I can't believe Deacon Billy touched you. That's not you to decide. You report it to the appropriate authorities. You stay out of the way and you let them do it. And you treat that girl with compassion, or boy. It can be a boy too. Counseling. They need understanding. The perpetrator, I understand God tells us to love our enemies. I get it. I get that. In the church, there is a role for ministry. But the perpetrator, in my opinion, needs accountability. He needs admission of sin. He needs guidance down the road to repentance. Church can provide that, but we've got to be honest. We've got to be honest with ourselves of what we're dealing with, and not sugarcoat it, and not act like it's no big deal, and not act like it didn't happen, or act like he's going to church now, everything's fine. It doesn't matter if he may be going to church now because he's wanting around your kids. So let's be wise as serpents, harmless as doves. And with that, hey, I gave you 6 minutes.
Thank you, Judge. Are there any questions for any of these that are on our panel today? Anybody have any questions? All right. We are very grateful to them for their, David.
Am I on? Okay. In the church, I guess it's a little different scenario because clergy is the mandatory reporter. What the law says is that mandatory reporters are to report it themselves. What that turned into with us, or how that affected reporting at the department, was with the schools. The teachers or the aides were telling the counselor that would tell the principal, and 3 people were once removed when it came to the department. So the law says that the person that has the information is supposed to report it. So that has come about more so with the schools. I don't know that it affects the church as much because every person at the church is not by law a mandatory reporter.
David, my understanding is because most of the time the report is made to a mandatory reporter, such as a Sunday school teacher or a youth teacher or a volunteer or a staff member. My understanding is, as Denise says, that the one who receives that information is the one who has to report it firsthand. But I do think that they can report it to you as the lead pastor. I don't think they should tell everybody, but you as a lead pastor need to know what is going on. They need to come to you and say, this child said this, we need to report it. I want you to be aware of it. You may not be directly involved in it at that point, but you do need to be aware of it. But it doesn't need to go any further than that. Does that answer your question? Okay. Any other questions? Yes, sir, Max.
Are you saying just talked or maybe had inappropriate conversation? Obviously, if it's inappropriate, if it's something that's kind of like a solicitation or photos or requests for photos, I think that's absolutely a report. I think if it's something that you feel uncomfortable about, like maybe there's lots of, like maybe an individual conversation's not per se inappropriate, but maybe the amount of contact somebody's having, that could be inappropriate. So I would think that that might be something that you'd call and talk to them about if that needs to be reported. Denise, would you agree?
While everything might not be a report, I think if you are in doubt, to call and report it, and we will ask enough questions to see if there is something there that's a report. But like I said earlier, it may be that we're adding that information to something that we've received from someone else.
What happened, the volunteers?
You have to be real careful with those scenarios of, oh, you tell your parent, or even telling someone else at school you think's going to report, because you don't know who that family is to the school. And if it's someone that they value in some certain light, it just may not be reported.
So if we do hear this from a student, we go to the school, who should be reported to the school, or do we call?
I mean, I don't know what your you know, what it may be with the school, because I'm not in charge of that. But if I were you, and it was me, I would report it to DHR.
Max, I think that's what we were saying. If there's a question, call. If you don't know what to do, call DHR, and then they can counsel, advise, and help you with that. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
So it is actually a crime if you are a mandatory reporter to not report. Now, at the same time, we're not out trying to get mandatory reporters. That's not what we're trying to do. We're just trying to educate, because if you have been in a place where most people go through life going, I'm going to mind my own business, and I want people to mind their own business. And as a mandatory reporter, you kind of have to flip a switch, and now it's kind of like, well, if it involves children, they are my business, and so I have to report something even if it's uncomfortable. So I would say that maybe if anybody feels like you're a mandatory reporter, maybe you should have reported something and you didn't, just from this point forward, just know you need to report. And even if maybe something, like, oh, well, a couple of weeks ago something happened and I didn't really think about reporting it, well, when you realize, when it flips in your brain that, oh yeah, I'm supposed to report that, go ahead and report it then. Don't go, oh, well, that's been 6 months ago and I don't want to stir up anything now. Just go ahead and report it at that point. So we're not, what we're really looking for when it comes to mandatory reporters not making reports, a child comes and says, hey, I'm being sexually abused by person A. And maybe you don't send that on, and now maybe something even worse happens. I mean, that's what we're trying to protect from. We're trying to protect from something even worse happening, or from more of those sorts of things happening. So nobody's out to get mandatory reporters. I mean, everybody in that, medical, clergy, teachers, everybody who's in that, you've got a lot on you, and we know that. What we're asking, I talked about earlier that this is the multidisciplinary team, the team. Mandatory reporters are really an extension of the team, because you're often the ones that are actually sending the information that gets something started initially. And so that's how we view it, and that's how we want mandatory reporters to view themselves.
All right, any other questions? Yes, sir.
So like if you're an Etowah County resident and something happens in Etowah County, is that what you're asking? You would call that DHR. To make an example, if you're 100 miles away in Montgomery County and something happens there, unless you're now let me say this, yes, it'd be safe to call that DHR, but let me say if Rainsville First is on a mission trip to Mobile and it occurs down there and it's all citizens, you would call this DHR. But if you know of something happening in Montgomery County, you call that DHR.
It's where the child lives. However, if you do not know what to do or what county, you can call us and we will get it to the appropriate person. I think you're talking about people that may be prominent or you don't think they will actually investigate it. I'm not really sure about each individual scenario. What I know is if it's here in this county and it was someone that worked with the department or something like that, we would ask another county to handle that so that no one would have to think like that. In that county, more than likely, according to who it is, you would contact law enforcement to start the report out if you didn't trust the DHR or vice versa. But in our case, in this county, we're going to ask someone else to work that so that there's no close working relationship.
Any other questions? Okay. I don't see any. We're going to wrap this up. I want to just put a couple of things out there for you to share with you. Suppose you're a fourth grade Sunday school teacher and you're teaching your kids, and your question for the day is what makes you happy and what makes you sad? So you go around the room and a little girl says, well, what makes me happy is when my dad plays with me. And everybody shares what makes them happy. But then you come back around and says, what makes you sad? The same little girl that said, Dad makes me happy when he plays with me, says, it makes me sad because Dad hurts me when we're in bed. Dad hurts me because we're in bed. What would you do? How would you respond as a Sunday school teacher? We had that actually happen in Etowah County to one of our churches just a few months ago. That very statement was made. The call was made on the Monday morning to DHR, and DHR immediately began an investigation that afternoon. And Dad was a deacon in the church. And right now, the child has been placed with her mother. She can have no contact with her dad. Okay? What would you do if that happened? What would you do if you had a deacon's meeting and the pastor's wife asked to come and speak to the deacons, and she comes and shares with you that her husband, the pastor, has been abusing her for 30 years of marriage? That actually happened in Etowah County almost a year ago. The pastor and his wife are now divorced. He's out of the ministry, and she's living protected so that he cannot get in touch with her. I share those stories with you because if you don't think it's real, it is. And if you don't think that one Sunday morning in a Sunday school class that a child may make a statement like the previous child did, you're making the wrong assumption. And if you think all pastors are perfect and doing and living and treating their family the way that they ought to, or children the way that they ought to, you're wrong. There are cases like this all over. And so for the church, we're talking about the church. One of the best ways you can deter, first of all, predators from infiltrating your congregation is to have good policies and enforce those policies. Doesn't do any good to have policies and not enforce them. It doesn't do any good to say that you're going to do something and not do it. So you need policies in place that you are actually going to enforce, that if you say that it is mandatory that you do a background check on all the people that work with your children and youth, you need to do background checks on all the people that work with your children and youth. You want to keep a predator out, you enforce policies. You make those policies known. And I'm not saying they won't find somewhere else to infiltrate, but you will be making your church a safe place. You will be helping fight the battle with these folks by stopping them from hurting children that are under your care. If you run a van ministry and you pick up kids, you better be sure you have a background check on your bus driver and whoever rides with him to keep the kids in order. You better be sure you have a background check. And so what I want to encourage you to do, pastors and lay people, is go to your church and develop policies. Put them in place. Background checks. Who can take who to the restroom? You think that's not a big deal? A man cannot go into the restroom with a little girl. You can't do that. That's unacceptable. I don't care who it is. You can't do that. And if we sit by and watch things like this happen, we're aiding and not preventing. And it's sad that we have to be that way. And there are resources that can help you. One is Ministry Safe, ministrysafe.org/ALSBOM, Alsbaum, is a place you can go to. You have to register. It costs $250. The Alabama Baptist State Convention will scholarship the first year for you. The $250, and you can go in and you can do training. All of your workers can do training on how to spot a predator, what kind of behavior to look for. It will give you templates of policies. It will also give you access to background checks that you can do on people to be sure that they are as cleared as they possibly can to work with your kids and students. I mentioned in just a few weeks there will be a website up called SAFE, S-A-F-E, safe.alsbaum.org. And it will be a place, a one-stop place, where you can go and get a tiered approach. If you can't do everything that you need to do, then there are suggested Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3 that will help you start the process of making your church a safe place against child abuse. It will also give you an opportunity to make policies on reporting. What is the chain of command in reporting? What would you do if it was your pastor that was the abuser? How would you handle that certain? What if it's your student minister or your worship pastor? What if they're the ones that are the perpetrators against the children in your church? How would you respond to that? How should that be reported within the confines of your church? Those are all things that you need to think about. You can't, if somebody reports the pastor and says the pastor is hurting me, you can't go to the pastor and say, Susie said you're hurting her. So how are you going to handle that situation? Where are you going to go? How are you going to go about reporting it? You need to know. You need to know the chain of command and how to do that. And I can't stress enough that it doesn't matter the size of your church. It doesn't matter if you run 20 or 2,000. You still need to do this. You still need to be aware. You still need to have precautions against this sort of thing happening in your church. And so my prayer is that as a result of today, that first of all, you have learned who your resources are here in DeKalb County, and you know that they are here to help you any way that they can. But my other prayer is that God will get a hold of your heart through His Holy Spirit and say, we got to go back and do something about this. We've got to protect our kids. And if it's true, like we've said, and I believe that it is, that you more than likely have an abuse victim inside your congregation, you may not know about it, but you do. You probably have somebody who's been a victim of some sort of abuse, whether it was neglect or physical, whatever it might have been, emotional. How are we going to respond if that person tells us? How are you going to respond to the victim? The judge shared with us how one church responded to the victim. I'm sitting over here cringing that the church wasn't on the side of the little girl, but defending a man who had obviously harmed this little girl. And folks, listen, that's the problem. We want to defend the preacher. We want to defend the good guy. We want to defend the deacon. And who we need to be defending and fighting for is the victim. It's the one that's hurt that we go for. It's the one that's hurt that we gravitate toward. And let justice fall as it may upon the one who brought harm to this person, whether he's a pastor, a worship pastor, a student pastor, whoever he may be, let justice fall on his head. Because we're going to help the victim. And we're going to try to help them get back on their feet. We can't ignore it anymore, folks. We can't pretend that it doesn't exist. It's here. And I don't know how many registered sex offenders you have in DeKalb County. We have over 220 in Etowah County. Etowah County is the smallest geographic county in the state. We have 220. That means we have a lot of sexual abusers that are convicted and on the registry that are living in communities. You don't believe me, you just pull up Etowah County and look at the map and see where they're positioned. It's kind of scary when you stop and think about it. When your child advocacy center sees 37 kids in 1 month and has to interview them to find out how they've been hurt or whatever they have been through, that's too many. That's too many. 37 kids. So it's time for us to join forces with these folks. They're doing all they can to keep them at bay. They're doing all they can to investigate and help the children. And if you want to help a child that's been an abuse victim, foster them. The foster care system is overloaded. They can tell you this. I know this. But foster a child. Bring them into a loving, caring home and try to help them get back on their feet and learn that they really are special and they are somebody and somebody really does love them. Bring them back. Bring them home if you can. There's so many things that we as a church can do to make a difference in our communities. And this is one of those things that we can do to be on the front line of compassion and the front line of helping and saying, not on my watch. This is not going to happen in our church. We're not going to be a victim of it. And I pray that that will be one of the results of our time together. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you for your interest. You didn't have to come this afternoon, but you did. And I know Brother David and Brother Keith are very, very grateful. Brother Keith can help you get resources, tell you where to go, and he'll be more than happy to help you do that. Let's pray together, and we'll be dismissed. Father, we love you. Lord, we love people. We love children. We don't want anybody to be a victim of mistreatment. And the reason we don't want it to be that way is because it's sin, and we don't like sin. We can't tolerate sin. So give us courage to go back to our churches and develop a system, get a team together to develop a system and a plan, a policy that says we're going to help protect children. As long as they're under our care, we're going to do all we can to protect them. Pour out your favor on this time today. Let there be fruit, is my prayer in Jesus' name. Amen.